Hello and welcome to Business Today Television. I'm Siddharth Zarabi, and with me today a guest who's worked in the financial services sector, in telecom, in the world's greatest search engine, and is now running a company that manages and is the largest independent cybersecurity firm in the world. Nikesh Arora, Chairman and CEO of Palo, Alto Networks. Nikesh, warm welcome to Business Today Television and the India Today Group studios here in Chile, Davos. I'm going to start this conversation by asking you if you've heard of a place called Jamtara in Jharkhand, India.
First of all, thank you very much for the warm welcome and the kind words. Or warm welcome, yes. I actually had not heard of it until I saw this Netflix show on Jamtara and I don't know how much that is real, but it was pretty interesting.
Pretty much all of it. And we've reported on that independently, and I can say that it's a highly innovative place when it comes to cyber fraud. But that's the subject of the conversation, and the backdrop is a country that does millions and millions of financial transactions, has one of the largest databases in Aadhaar, is still struggling in a few ways to come up with a proper personal data protection framework, and is vulnerable to factors from outside. But I began with a domestic sort of example to bring home to our viewers that cybersecurity is not just an external threat, it could well happen internally. How serious is it globally and also for India as an issue?
Well, first of all, Siddharth, cybersecurity is a growing threat and will continue to be so, because if you think about it, in the last 30 years, I'd say since the internet was born in the 90s or late 80s, early 90s, we've been connecting everything.
Yeah.
Right? You could not have thought about beaming from Davos back into India because you never had thought that there'd be such clear connection available. Now everything is connected. Slowly and steadily, everything's getting connected. And the more you connect things, the more the doors you open, the more bad actors can get into the place where good actors have to be. So what we made it easy is we made it easy for people sitting in a basement somewhere in the world or sitting in an office somewhere in the world access information anywhere else, but at the same time also allows them to be able to hack those things and bring them to a halt. I think so. The problem of cyber threat is going to continue to rise as long as you continue to connect things. And we really never designed it in such a secure way, all of our technology infrastructure, to protect it from every potential bad act. So this is a growing problem. I was at a panel yesterday, and the Prime Minister of Albania put out a stat, which I kind of heard a version of, but it was startling to hear him say it. He says, if cyber crime / fraud returns, its impact was an independent country, it'd be the third largest GDP in the world.
Third largest GDP
after US and China. So
after US and
that's
China.
The size of the pie.
That's the size of the pie, and that's a stark number. I want to ask you, who bears ultimate responsibility for preventing cyber fraud? Shouldn't it be, and this is a very sort of common man kind of perspective, the people who build the technology, shouldn't they be responsible, Nikesh?
Well, it depends. The answer is yes, but also you have to dig deeper. What does that mean? So, do you hold the guy who made the computer responsible for somebody stealing your money through a bank fraud by email? He's built the technology that's allowed this to happen. Will you blame your internet provider who provided the connectivity that allowed you to connect to the internet, that allowed you to get an email which had a phishing attack in it? Maybe not. Well, you blame the email provider because they allowed you the facility of email, and they should be now responsible for the fact that you got a fraudulent email. So you tell me or do you hold your bank responsible because somehow they acted on an email which looked like it was from you, but it wasn't from you, and you got hacked? So it's not a simple answer to that question. I do believe at the end of the day, the people providing you the goods or services are responsible for your experience and for that to be delivered in a trustworthy fashion.
But how we use it and the results of that are primarily our responsibility.
I think it's a shared responsibility. I think we have to be cognizant, as well as the service provider that we're using has to be of high repute and trusted.
Well, so it's like the example of a car, which when you drive that, your driving is responsible for how safe you live. So,
but you have to have a safe car.
You have to have a safe car.
You don't want the wheels spinning out at the same time.
And therefore, the telecom infrastructure, the apps that ride on it, the interconnected, and in a 5G world, everything machine to machine talking to each other. How do I, as a user, remain secure?
Well, that's a good question. So I think, all one can recommend is for a user to have good hygiene. And good hygiene means be careful about how much data you share with people, because the more data they have, the more they can do identity theft. They can pretend to be you. If they have all the details of your personal life, your Aadhaar card, your date of birth, everything else, they can go set up an account looking like you. That causes the door to be open for fraud. That's one option. The other option is make sure you doubly secure every place where you have something valuable to protect, whether it's your bank accounts, whether it's your email, whether it's your various services that you use on the internet. So, look, I think the base requirement from every one of us is to use hygiene and not do silly things. Like clicking on a phishing email means you're now accepting that you're going to go and or giving your information to some anonymous site or some dubious site. That's a problem.
I completely take your point. It's like us crossing the road. Look both ways.
Yes.
And maybe upwards as well. But the point is that when we hear about very large scale incidents of
Yes.
Data breaches,
Yes.
it happens at the corporate level.
That's right. At the enterprise level, yes.
And
yes.
why is it happening at the enterprise level? People have very large teams who work for it. You as a company would have insight into why is it happening?
So I think it's a good question. It's a great question, Siddharth. As I mentioned, we're trying to catch up. We never designed most of our technical infrastructure 20, 30 years ago to be fully secured, because we never expected it to be fully connectable from everywhere. Like today, we're busy connecting manufacturing plants. Those machines were never created to be connected to a central console. Now, when you set up, technology and connectivity after the fact, I'm sure you have to take some shortcuts, put some band-aid around it, and that becomes your point of vulnerability. So you have to be careful that you've designed security from the beginning. Now, I think the good news is we're all getting cognizant of it. We're all trying to go make it better, both at a nation-state level as well as an enterprise level. So I think it's headed in the right direction. But do we have a cyber debt to pay? Yes. We have to go and undo the acts of the past where we hadn't built security in from day one.
For an individual, is that even possible to sort of go back and wipe our digital lives out, or at least secure them, if not wipe them out?
Yeah, I think, look, there's two different parts there. There's one is the cyber threat, the other is the privacy issue. And I think now you're touching on the privacy issue, where there's too much information about you out there in the public domain, and you're trying to get it back. Unfortunately, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. Okay. If it's out there, it's out there. If people knew how old you were 2 years ago, they still know how old you are. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter
if you try and hide it anymore.
The broader point for a country like India, which is still very significantly dependent on imported hardware.
Yes.
And a lot of the product software as
That's
well.
Right. That's right.
How at a country level can we secure ourselves? Because there are bad actors, and then there are just, people who are doing it only for the money.
Well, they're both bad actors, I think, right?
Oh, yeah. When I spoke about bad actors, I meant like country to country level.
Oh, nation-state level. Yes, you mean nation-state actors.
Yes,
right.
Yes.
I think as we talked about security, we have let too many people design security at an individual level or a micro level. The electricity grid has a team that designs security for them. The power grid has one that designs. There's the oil and gas companies have their own version of security. The problem is we have a very decentralized approach to how we tackle the problem of security. Now, you would never do that for national defense. You have one army. You have one air force. You know exactly how it's going to work. Every part of the country, everywhere it goes. So I think you need a more planned, concentrated, aligned security strategy. A cybersecurity strategy has to have the same importance and relevance as you have for national defense strategy. Because guess what? I think in the future, a lot of the chaos that will be caused around the world will be caused because everything is connected. You don't have to go show up and actually cause physical impact. You can do it digitally. If I could bring down the electricity grid, or somebody can bring down the oil pipeline like we saw in the US, that's cause for
concern. And the
concern.
electricity grid in India in a recent example.
That's right. Well, that's just because there's there's old technology. You need to go upgrade that. But I think as we do that, we should make sure that security is built in first. So we've got to do that, I think, from a longer term perspective at a national level in every country. Now, your question about where the hardware comes from. Look, at the end of the day, we are a global economy everywhere. There are people who specialize in certain things. They do a really good job. Do you want the best that's out there, or do you want to go spend the time to build it yourself and go through the trials and tribulations of learning? That's a choice one can make. So I think there's some, this is not a security specific comment. I think there's lots of interesting.
And bans are also not the answer. Like you said, strategy is.
That's right.
Would it therefore make sense if you were advising someone, policymaker in India, that perhaps, and we love ministries, we have a lot of them, it's time to consider a Department of Cyber Defense?
I I am sure there is some part of the defense infrastructure which is responsible for this, and I think
but putting it all together, the point that you made, one
has happened recently.
One India, one cyber defense force or department or whatever you call it.
Yeah, look, I think it's just most recently. I was talking to the Australian Minister of Interior. They just went through a series of hacks and series of critical infrastructures, and even their largest telco, one of the largest telcos, got hacked. So there's a lot of customer data got taken out, and they're now coming up with a national strategy to make sure this happens. In the U.S., we've seen an executive order from President Joe Biden earlier in his term, where he put out an executive order of how security should be handled at a national level. They have concentrated some efforts. So you're beginning to see movement around the world as it becomes, one of the top 3 threats in every country, every business.
Nikesh, I want to ask you about the cost of cybersecurity. Yeah. But before that, just a quick comment about one of the programs which someone was telling me is the largest of its kind in the world. That is the Reserve Bank of India tokenizing financial transactions. When it happened, there was a bit of hiccup. Some people said, "Oh, this is just too much." Yeah. And for the average viewer, I'm not asked for OTPs here when I use my cards, but in India, you have to do it double time. So how significant is that? How good or bad is it in your...
Well, like asking for an OTP every time is a good thing, because it makes sure that it's validating your identity every time. It kind of follows the principle of zero trust. The principle of zero trust says, I have a badge, I can swipe it everywhere, I'm who I am. Well, did you check that my badge didn't get stolen? Are you sure I have the badge? Now, if they're asking you to check every time, then they're validating that you are the person, because you're probably getting in your mobile phone. And yes, can somebody steal your mobile phone and your bank details? Of course they can, but that is a lower probability event. That's why you do multi-factor authentication. I think that's a good thing. I don't think that's a bad thing at all. I think more countries, more people should do that in validating transactions going forward.
And tokenization that the RBI does?
Well, I'm not fully aware of what they're doing, but...
it basically means that any merchant cannot store a person's card details. Yes, you have to do it every time, all over again.
Which is great. I think I understand now what you mean. And that is a concept where there is still some secure place that data is held, and it's transmitted securely to the merchant only for that particular transaction, and only the relevant parts of the data are sent to them, which is a good thing, because that if any of those merchants ever get breached, they don't have your data anyway. So it does create a much more protective environment. And I think that's good, because we're a country of 1.4 billion people in India. There's millions of merchants. And if you're buying some things over a lifetime, your data is in 5,000 merchants, then there is a risk that your data gets stolen. If it's sitting in some secure, centralized place, then you just have to worry about that place. No longer every merchant has your data.
India, when it comes to IT or telecom, and you have experienced that in the past, there's a sort of unit economic sense that prevails, and low cost.
Yes.
How costly is cybersecurity, especially in the Indian context?
Well, let's go back to where we started, right? I said if cyber impact was a country in itself, it's third largest GDP, which means we're paying for it today somehow, right? So it can only be better if the cyber fraud, cyber threat, cyber attack is going to cost us less. So it's going to help us. So I think from that context, we're already spending a lot of money with the risks and the impacts of cybersecurity. If you spend that on prevention, it's just like healthcare. Right? Yeah. The more money you spend on prevention, the less you probably have to spend on remediating issues.
Absolutely. Nikesh, tell us, what is your company doing in this space? When you are called the largest independent cybersecurity firm in the world, what does that really mean?
Well, what it means is that we work with nation states around the world. We work with enterprises around the world. We work with them to understand their cybersecurity footprint and to see how we can work with them to take that to the next generation, to migrate that. Now, you could be, going to the cloud. You could be, running a lot of data through lots of networks. So we come in and we put sensors and AI that analyzes that information to see if there is real data, or there's malware, or there's just pointing to the wrong places. So we're trying to make sure that your infrastructure gets more secure, and if there is bad acts that are attempted against you, are stopped as they're happening. And we've been shifting more and more towards using AI, because in my mind, in the end, security is an AI problem, it's a data problem. It's very hard to get it done through humans only.
As we wind down the conversation, Nikesh, a couple of questions beyond your current role and into your past.
I knew you were going to go somewhere. Yeah.
I remember meeting and talking to you and sort of writing a story that was not on camera. I was a print reporter those days, 20 years back, about telecom and India's future. Today, 5G is getting rolled out. 4 times a day, I get press releases from 2 companies that they have added towns. And 20 years back, there were a lot of regulatory hassles. how do you look at India's 5G story? And I mean, what do you have to say as a former telecom analyst and practitioner?
First of all, Siddharth, thank you for reminding me how old both of us are getting. 20 years ago seems like a lifetime ago. Look, at that point in time, I think India followed the US model of licensing, and we had a lot of micro licenses, I call them, in the country. And I think the last 20 years, we've had to see a lot of consolidation. It's a good outcome. Because I think telecom infrastructures are sort of almost like national infrastructures. You have to make sure to get the unit economics you talked about and the leverage the scale. It's important to have fewer players than too many players. Now, I was just at a telecom tech governors meeting yesterday here, and I was, delighted and warmed my heart in this cold weather to hear that India is leading the 5G implementation in the world. This is a country where we were not ready to talk about 2G at that time and 3G, and we're trying to validate business cases today. India is leading from the front from the technological perspective. I think a lot also has to do with the other infrastructure projects the country has undertaken, like the whole UPI and other thing, where we've tried to create a single financial infrastructure. I think these are amazing things for the country, and I think all these things coupled together actually will allow India to continue this journey of phenomenal growth.
The Ericsson CTO was sitting right here on this chair a couple of days back, and he said exactly the very same thing, and talking about how India is making great strides in this. My final question. What is that one or a couple of technology things that you're looking forward to in 2023 with your vast experience across sectors? What's going to change the world as we know it?
So, Siddharth, I'll tell you a story. As you might have noticed, I was in Banaras a few months ago. So I had the privilege of going back to PHU, where I graduated from in 1989. That was a long time ago.
Yes.
Right. And while there, I visited the computer center, and I was thinking back when I was graduating and we were programming in 1988, I got to program on something called an ICL 1904.
ICL 1904. I don't know how many remember that.
You know what that is?
No, I don't.
Good. It was a computer made by a European manufacturer, which you didn't have a keyboard. You had to go to a guy who had a punch card machine, and they would punch a card, which would make holes in the card. And there was a card reader which would then feed the code into the computer.
Okay, I'm not that old. My first one was a dot matrix, and I did use a keyboard.
So I'm telling you, that was then. Now, the fascinating part was I carry two phones, one for work, one for business. The two of them have 10,000 times the computing power of that computer I programmed in 1989. The reason I'm telling you that story is that when you look at technological trends from a long-term lens, you will marvel at what the possibility is. And in the same place I said, I had just experienced AI through ChatGPT, and we use AI all the time, but it had never been crystallized. And I think what happened is when people have been using ChatGPT around the world, even in India, it is beginning to crystallize what the power of that technology is. Now, just imagine if, and I think it's going to be a lot faster, not 30 years, even 30 years or less, it was 10,000 times better than what you see today.
Wow.
Try and fathom what that is.
Impossible to provide.
Right? Yeah. And I'll tell you, we should all worry about what we do today because it'll be done differently.
Okay. Does your former company have reason to be worried about ChatGPT?
Look, I think what AI is going to, as I said, the iPhone legitimized mobile data. It doesn't mean that it wasn't there before. So I'm pretty sure my former company, every company which has been in the tech space the last 25 years, is using some form of AI. I think all this will do is will incentivize them to showcase it more, move faster on it, and burn the ships.
Well, I enjoyed this conversation, Nikesh. As always, you are spot on, sharp, and that's what Nikesh Arora has been known for in his wide and stellar career. Thank you very much for joining us here. With that, it's a wrap on this conversation. If you've been, thank you very much for watching.